On this episode of Newt's World, I am delighted to be talking with a good friend, somebody who's been educating me now for, I think, 20 years, Dr. Nicholas Eberstadt, the Henry Wendt Chair in Political Economy at the American Enterprise Institute. He's the author of several books, including Men Without Work, Post-Pandemic Edition, which is the updated version of his landmark 2016 study, Men Without Work. And he's out with a new book now, America's Human Arithmetic, Essential Essays from Nicholas Eberstadt. And I have to say, I do not remember ever having a conversation with Nicholas that I didn't walk away with a whole range of new ideas. I'm thrilled, Nicholas, that you're joining me.
Thanks so much for inviting me.
Before we get into this, we've never really had this discussion. How did you get into your fascination with quantitative data and with what it tells you about the world?
I just kind of stumbled into it, like all the other great things that happened in my life. I started out first day of college, first class in college, taking a course on population, resources, and environment. And I thought that stuff was fascinating. And so I got a bug, and I've never been able to shake the habit.
Do you find occasionally the numbers sort of surprise you, that they lead you to conclusions you would never have reached otherwise?
Oh, no. I mean, that's what's the fun of it, is that it's full of surprises. There are all of these amazing things, some of them not so pleasant to contemplate, that are hiding in plain sight. These things are evolving in some sort of way quietly so that they aren't biting people, but they're changing our lives. I mean, we see an asteroid strike, we feel a pandemic, but there are all sorts of trends that are affecting our lives in important ways that are kind of quiet, and somehow they escape us.
There's a point that Peter Drucker made maybe a half century ago, that with a lot of these kind of demographic studies, you really do know for the next 30, 40, 50 years, because you see the population you have and you know about what it's going to go through.
That's exactly right. When you try to do a forecast of what the political future is like in 25 years, I'm at sea. We know how well economic long-term forecasts have worked. They haven't helped us in trying to forecast technology. But the secret sauce that demographers have is that the overwhelming majority of people who are already alive here today will be alive in 10, 15, 20 years. And so you can just see what that profile looks like, compare it to today, connect the dots, and you've got some pretty useful information there.
Well, and when you look at certain kinds of quantitative data, suddenly you realize, for example, the impact of the Chinese one-child policy, which had a totally different effect, I think, than anybody really had thought through in terms of having 4 adults now depending on a much smaller population to take care of them.
Absolutely. In all social policies, as you know very well, have their intended outcomes and their unintended outcomes. And this is the mother of all social policies, this terrible, ambitious decision to recast the family for what was the world's largest population. So if it's the mother of all social policies, it's going to have the mother of all unintended consequences. And the Chinese people and the Chinese regime are having to live with those now.
As I understand it, even though that was their official policy and they imposed it very ruthlessly, the actually largest drop in population patterns is Korea, because Korean women apparently have decided they don't want to have kids.
It's remarkable what's going on in South Korea right now. Back in the 1990s, I was studying Eastern Germany right after the reunification, and my jaw dropped when I saw how low birth levels got in the initial shock, because even though life was getting better in all sorts of ways, it was a big transition for people. There was a lot of anxiety. The birth level per woman in South Korea today, under conditions of orderly progress, no unification, no shocks, is lower than it was in Eastern Germany at its lowest point. And if you go to South Korea's capital, you're getting towards half a birth per woman per lifetime if current levels persisted. You know that you need just over 2 births per woman per lifetime for a population to be stable over time. So we're seeing changes all around the world. We're seeing a birth crash in country after country after country. And I'm afraid that the demographers haven't explained it very well, but it's going to be transforming our future very soon.
And as I understand it, it's mostly volitional, and that it's not because there's a virus or a problem. It's just that across the planet, people are having fewer children.
Yes, sir. You can imagine a future where estrogen in the water or microplastics or whatever would be a constraint biologically on our ability to have children. But the evidence so far is that there's an enormous shift in mentality, an enormous shift in mindset that includes big changes in desired childbearing. And it's not just in rich countries like USA or Switzerland or South Korea. It's in very, very poor countries, in places like Burma, Myanmar. There's been a birth crash, and it doesn't seem to be because of nutrition. It's a worldwide mentality revolution.
Maybe there's a profound shift in how women see themselves.
That has to have something to do with it. Knowing that it's no longer necessary to live the way one's mother lived. There are all sorts of new options for people. I think that our little friend, the iPhone, which has now saturated almost all of the world, may be having as important a technological impact as the pill did 2 generations ago. I can't prove that yet. But the correspondence between cell phone saturation and accelerated drops in birth rates all around the world, it's pretty thought-provoking.
Well, it may also lead to a whole notion of electronic neighborhoods in which, for example, young influencers aren't particularly excited about having 6 kids.
Again and again, in places where I go all around the world, I see not just young people, but certainly young people sitting on street corners, gazing into their iPhone. And it's almost like a Narcissus mirror. It's almost like you're kind of jumping through a mirror into another world, which I kind of tend to think of as both, at one and the same time, irresistible and inferior to the real world that you're living in.
But for some reason, comfortable.
Yeah, irresistible and comfortable. There's certainly been a shift in thinking about children in this particular way. All around the world, you see more interest in self-actualization, in self-fulfillment, in convenience in various ways. I mean, these are just revealed preferences. Now, I have 4 children, and I love them all very dearly, but one thing that they are not is convenient. And so if we are seeing a worldwide shift away from inconvenience, I think I know what that's going to do to pressures on birth rates.
Well, and at the same time, we're seeing a dramatic increase, I think, in the number of pets.
Yes. I have a study in mind, which I've got the title for. I haven't done the data yet, but the study will be called, "And the Pets Shall Inherit the Earth." Because if you go through different neighborhoods in the U.S., and not just the U.S., I've seen this also in Europe and in Asia, maybe other places as well, pets are no longer always supplements to a family with children. They're increasingly a substitute for the children, and the pets get sort of anthropomorphized by the pseudo-parents or quasi-parents or whatever you wish to call it. There's been a whole shift over in South Korea, which you mentioned South Korea earlier, where baby carriages and strollers, those companies aren't going out of business. They're just repurposing them for kittens and for puppies.
Much more in Europe than in the U.S., but you go into a restaurant and you look around and there are people who have brought their pet with them because they are part of the family. I mean, they don't go anywhere without them. People need social contact, and so in the age of the cell phone, if you're not going to have children, you can at least have a dog.
It's a strange paradox, isn't it? There have never been so many people on Earth as today. The world has never been as densely populated as it is today. And yet, in some ways, it seems like it's never been as lonely as it is today. Isn't that strange?
One of the reasons I was so eager to have a chance to chat with you directly is the study you just did on the number of males who aren't working, but they're not unemployed. I think this is a phenomenon.
It's a historically established fact for post-war American society. Today, take a look at the latest monthly jobs report. About 7 million prime-age men, that's official government term for the 25 to 54 group for pretty self-evident reasons. They're in the prime of life. 7 million prime-age men, roughly speaking, are workforce dropouts. They're neither working nor looking for work. And this means you add these roughly 7 million to the little over 2.5 million who are formally unemployed, who don't have a job but are looking for them. The work rate for prime-age men in America today is slightly lower than it was when we first developed this measurement for the 1940 census at the tail end of the Great Depression, when the national unemployment rate was 14%. The work rate for Americans today is lower than it was in early 1940 at the tail end of the Great Depression. It's kind of mind-blowing.
You're talking about people who have consciously, in a sense, dropped out.
Well, if you take a look at those 7 million, there is a small fraction that I would describe as full-time students, people who have taken a semester off, if you want to put it that way, from the workforce because they're skilling up and they intend to go back. Their patterns of life are totally different from the long-term dropouts. And this long-term dropout group is well over 6 million. And what we see about this long-term dropout group from their own self-reporting, I think is really pretty distressing. This isn't like therapists or anthropologists or people examining them. Every year, the Department of Labor comes out with a time use survey. It asks people what they do between the time they wake up and they go to bed and how long they sleep. And they get self-reported answers from the male dropouts. And you look at this stuff and you have to be very concerned. The male dropouts say that they basically don't do civil society. There's almost no worship, almost no charitable activity, almost no volunteering. They've got tons of time on their hands, and they do surprisingly little work around the house, cleaning, helping out with other people in the homes. What they report doing is watching screens. They say that they're watching, we don't know what exactly or what type of screens, but they're watching stuff for about 2,000 hours a year. Now, 2,000 hours a year, almost like a full-time job. And you add to this the additional item that is reported on one of the surveys they added as just a question. Before the pandemic, just about half of these dropout men said that they were taking pain medication every day. So it's not just like playing video games at home in the basement. It's playing video games at home in the basement stoned. This is not a formula for human flourishing. This is a formula for misery.
Which sort of relates to how the culture has really found less and less capacity for optimism and joy.
I don't think there's a lot of joy in this lifestyle. I think there's a lot of call it pain, whether it's physical pain or psychic pain, or being connected to your so-called community through the false friend of the internet. We all know that that little Greek fellow way back when, Aristotle, was describing a world 2,500 years ago, but when he said that us human beings are social creatures, we haven't changed that much. We need people. We need family. We need work to help fulfill us. We need our communities. We need our faith. And there are a lot of people who think that solitary confinement is cruel and unusual punishment when meted out by the state. But this is something like solitary confinement.
What is it because?
You're the historian, but when I look at these trends, I see this flight from the workforce for men, for the prime age men, seems to have begun in about the mid-60s. We don't really see any sign of this from the end of World War II until the mid-60s. So what happened starting in the mid-60s? We started to see the breakdown of the formerly traditional family. We saw the big expansion of the U.S. welfare state. We saw the explosion of crime and then the pendulum of punishment, huge explosion in felonies, felonization in the United States. Saw big increases in immigration. Now our newcomers are immigrants, no matter what their ethnicity or almost their educational level. They're guys, they're more likely to be in the game, they're more likely to be working than their counterpart native-born Americans. So there are all sorts of things that have changed our society, and the mores have clearly changed as well.
Are these mostly people who are living by themselves, or are they part of a household with other people?
It's a very good question. They're more likely to be living by themselves than guys who are in the workforce. They're much more likely to be never married than guys who are in the workforce. Never married men are way overrepresented in that pool of dropouts. They're more likely to have lower levels of education, but there's a surprisingly high proportion of people who've got some college or even college graduates. So it's not totally stratified in this way either. And they're disproportionately likely to be native-born rather than foreign-born.
You end up with people who have been born into the wealthiest society in history, with the greatest plausible range of opportunities to define any life they want, and they stop.
This is the paradox here, Nate. This is the paradox. I mean, part of what I tried to document, describe, analyze in this book, America's Human Arithmetic, is this phenomenon. I don't know how one would call it. I call it in this book, I call it the new misery, because it's not a misery that's traditional. It's not the sort of historical misery that is connected to too little income, too little food, too little health. We're rolling in money. We're awash with wealth in our society. And some of the dysfunctions that we see today could only be financed by a society with our historically unprecedented level of affluence. You couldn't afford to have 10% of guys as kind of permanent dropouts from the workforce if we had a 19th century level of wealth.
And you're also not including in those people who may be in the gray economy.
No, I'm not including gray economy. There is some of that. Of course, there is some of that in the U.S., and by definition, Uncle Sam doesn't track that very well, and our statisticians don't track that very well. But my impression, and I have to say this is an impression, because I have tried to look at this, is that while the male dropouts are making some money on the side, it's more like pin money than like buying second homes sort of stuff. It's like enough money to go out for a nice splurge at a restaurant, or maybe even if you come in with a big score, going on a little trip or something. But We're not talking about a large number of invisible people who are really working the way that we might, for example, expect to see in Italy, where everybody plays the tax avoid game.
I gather this is largely a male phenomenon.
Well, it's largely a male phenomenon, but not entirely a male phenomenon. We have a form of gender equality underway that we may not totally welcome. Right now, as we speak, labor force participation rates for prime-age women in America are more or less at all-time highs. And from an economic standpoint, that looks great. And it looks so great that people have ignored the little problem that's hiding in plain sight in the corner, which is the bookend to the male dropouts. There's a women without work problem that I would describe like this. Look at the prime-age women who are neither working nor looking for work, but who also have no children at home with them under the same roof, in the same household, same family, and who are not presently married. If you look at that group, it has been growing exponentially over time, quietly but exponentially. I talked about 7 million more or less dropout guys. When I try to do the numbers on, call them the dropout girls, it's about 3.5 million. It's only half as large as the guys, but let's wait and see where we are. Just like the dropout guys, this group of women, about half of them say that they're taking pain meds every day, the same sort of way. They report time use patterns that are a little bit too close for comfort to what I described about the dropout men. So we're seeing this for both men and women. It's just that the men seem to be the leading indicator, if you want to put it that way.
But you do have dramatically more women in college and in law school, which to me raises the question, to what extent does that exacerbate finding husbands? Because historically women married up, not down.
I mean, I think you've put your finger on a huge question. Demographers have kind of a Greek name that makes it sound like something illicit. It's a hypergamy. You can't be arrested for that. It's like a game of musical chairs, as you indicate. And if over half of the higher educated population now going through colleges and universities are women, you can see how the arithmetic is going to look. Unless there's a big change in the social contract, we've got a kind of a supply and demand problem.
I was thinking you're going to have a lot more women who will find that there's not an acceptable male for them to pay attention to.
Part of the problem also has been the sort of I don't have a better way of describing this, but the male crack-up over the last 2 generations. And obviously it's not everybody, mostly not a male crack-up, but there are too many men for whom it has been a crack-up. Not just the dropping out of the workforce. We've had an explosion of felony convictions, crime punishment, and at this point, although the government doesn't collect these figures for reasons that I still don't understand, since we've got the first new nation, and we started with a census, which was pretty high-tech in 1790. We want data to help us solve problems. But the number of felons in America is statistically invisible from the standpoint of the U.S. government because we don't collect that info. If you try to do back-of-the-envelope or slightly more rigorous than back-of-the-envelope calculations, it looks today as if 1 in 7 adult men has a felony conviction in his background. And what this means is that when you look at the entire population of people who've got felony convictions, You talk a lot about mass incarceration, but for every person who's in prison in the United States, there are 10 or more in society in general who've got a felony conviction in their background. 1 in 7 men, maybe. That's got a huge impact on life trajectories after that.
Do you have any idea what the overlap is between having been in prison and being part of this 7 million?
I can't tell you for sure because our information on invisible ex-con America is so bad at the national level. But I do have a chapter in this latest book, in America's Human Arithmetic, where I take what survey data and data sets might help with this. And here's what I find. No matter what your ethnicity, no matter what your education level, you're way more likely to be a workforce dropout if you're a guy and you've been arrested than if you've never been arrested. And you're way more likely to be out of the workforce if you've been to prison than if you've, quote, only been arrested, unquote. Now, that does not tell us why this should be the case, but it looks like it's pretty for real.
In a sense, we ought to have a lot more serious thinking about the transition out of prison and back into a full society.
We want people not to be recidivists. We want them to go on the straight and narrow that paid their debt to society. We don't want them to return to a life of crime. We hope that we can unlock the human potential that former offenders have. And in the world that we're heading into, where even the United States is not guaranteed an escape from depopulation, we're going to need all the human resources we have.
Yeah. You can sort of see it coming, but you can't quite yet see how it's going to play out, although I'm guessing in places like Japan, we have some notion, because they're now 20 or 30 years ahead of us.
Japan is a fascinating example, isn't it? I mean, the Japanese are very aware of how different they are from everybody else in the world, and they say that they're an exception, and maybe they are. One interesting thing about Japan that makes me somewhat more hopeful about how the world can deal with depopulation. As you say, Japan's conventionally defined working-age population has been shrinking for 30 years. Its head count has been going down for over 15 years. And last year, it recorded its highest ever number of employed people. And it sounds like a contradiction, but what it means is that labor force participation rates have been going up. And because Japan is just about the healthiest country in the world, the longest life expectancy at birth, people who would formerly have been in retirement are economically actively engaged. And there's a lot of prospect there, I think, all around the world for unlocking the value of health, especially with healthy aging.
You're also suggesting, I think, that if you found a way to get most of the 7 million back in the game, and if you found a way to get people to find jobs that they want to do, I mean, I suspect you and I are both in the same boat in that neither of us will ever fully retire because what we do is our hobby, which we convince people to pay us for so they think it's work. But in fact, it's what we want to do.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. So, I mean, in that sense, we may not have sort of a crisis of underemployment or a crisis of not having enough people to fill jobs, at least for a very long time.
Too many men in the United States don't understand is that a job isn't just a paycheck. Work is a service to other people that helps complete you. And if you haven't been in the paid workforce, there's a whole vista that you don't understand about real self-fulfillment. I can tell this to people in the same way that I can tell them you don't understand what life's like if you don't have children, but there's no way that you can really explain Technicolor to people who are living in black and white.
Reagan used to say that the best social program is a job.
Being connected to the workplace, being connected to society. We talk in this very narrow way about self-fulfillment, but there's kind of a broader, and we get back to Aristotle, or we get to the Christian classics, get to the tenets of Western civilization, but it's a question about completing yourself as a human being. There's something there that's fulfilling in a way that's kind of hard to describe to people who haven't touched it.
Your book, America's Human Arithmetic, is actually a series of essays written over the past 30 years that look at what you describe as an examination of the American condition. Why did you decide to publish it now?
Well, 2026 seems like a pretty good year to take the temperature for our national experiment, since it's a quarter of a millennium underway. And it also seemed like a good time to take a measure of where we are, because there seems to be so much dissatisfaction in our country, distrust, lack of confidence in our institutions, anxiety. And it seemed to me that it was just an extraordinary, I would say, agonizing irony to the contraposition between our national achievement, most powerful country that's ever existed in history, more reach than the Mongols, more reach than the Roman Empire. No country's ever created as much wealth as we have. We're $180 trillion of private net worth with a T. It's an unimaginable amount of money. Despite these achievements, there's so much dissatisfaction with America's place in the world today, in our own country. And trying to understand where's the disjuncture. And that's why I put together this collection of essays, because I think looking at some of these problems that have been hiding in plain sight helps us to get a better bearing on where we've gone wrong and on maybe how we can get it right again.
I can encourage everybody listening to get America's Human Arithmetic, because as usual, just in this one conversation, I find that I learn so much from you, and I'm stimulated to think about new ideas, that you really are, I think, intellectually a national treasure. And I hope you will, for a very long time, continue to think and learn and educate us. And I want to thank you for joining me. Your new book, America's Human Arithmetic, is available now on Amazon, in bookstores everywhere. Our listeners can follow the work you're doing with American Enterprise Institute by visiting aei.org. And I am confident that we'll come back at some point in the near future. Beg you to come back and have another conversation.
Thank you so much. It was so much fun for me. Force me to come back.
Thank you to my guest, Dr. Nicholas Eberstadt. Newt's World is produced by Gingrich 360 and iHeartMedia. Our executive producer is Garnsey Sloan. Our researcher is Rachel Peterson. The artwork for the show was created by Steve Penley. Special thanks to the team at Gingrich 360. If you've been enjoying Newt's World, I hope you'll go to Apple Podcasts and both rate us with 5 stars and give us a review so others can learn what it's all about. Join me on Substack at Gingrich360.net. I'm Newt Gingrich. This is Newt's World.